There is something to learn from the terrorist attack in Moscow. It's this. Now the world can see what Israel is up against as well. And they can see that blaming the Jews for this war in Gaza is a mistake and a slur. In Moscow, 4 Islamic State gunmen on Friday stormed a rock concert and killed more than 130 people. And why? Because they were unbelievers. Now, be clear about that. The Islamic State Khorasan, it's an Islamic State branch based in Afghanistan, said its terrorists had attacked a large gathering of Christians. The terrorists also photographed themselves giving the four-finger salute of Islamists, meaning there is no God but Allah. Here again, Jews are only the first in the Islamist queue for destruction, and not really because of anything they've done. It's more for who they are. They're unbelievers. And Moscow reminds us that Christians are next. Now, I know that terrorism against Russia isn't getting much sympathy after the terror that Russia's unleashed in Ukraine, but it is important to see the pattern, as well as still feel some sympathy for the innocent. This attack on innocent concertgoers in Moscow is a carbon copy of the Islamic State attack or the Islamic State attack in 2015 on concertgoers in Paris, where 90 people were killed. It's also like the Islamist attack in 2017 on concertgoers in Manchester, 22 people dead. This is a war on unbelievers, and to terrorists like these, there are no innocent people. There is no one you can blame for inciting this. It's like, your government did this and therefore this attack, or but you took their land, whether false or not, and that's why this has happened. No, they may be complicating factors, but the bottom line is your crime is just being an unbeliever. And that kind of hatred is what Israel is up against. Now, Hamas, the Islamist terrorist group which runs Gaza and started this latest war, it started on October 7 by slaughtering 1,200 Israelis, raping women, taking some 250 people hostage. This Hamas feeds off exactly this kind of hate. Now, I heard the fool that runs the United Nations blame Israel for inviting this slaughter.
Important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum.
But you tell me what Israel did that could then justify the mass rapes on October 7. How do you draw the line there? How do you say because of what Israel did, beheading, that's justified? Or murdering quite deliberately elderly people, even children, women in their homes. Now, when I holidayed in Israel a couple of weeks ago, I visited Be'eri. It's a kibbutz targeted by Hamas on October 7. And I saw how methodically the terrorists had gone from house to house, from neighbour to neighbour, killing people who clearly posed no threat. These were socialists, ironically, the kind of people who are now marching in the street in the West saying, ceasefire now from the river to the sea. And many of them were women and the elderly. This was genocidal. This was primitive. This was an evil you can't bargain with. You can't say, look, will you stop if I give you this or that or this bit of land? No. This is a primitive hatred that's insatiable. These are demands that cannot be met. They can never be satisfied unless by the West suicide. And I think that's underlined by a recent poll in France, in the weekly Journal du Dimanche, which asked French Muslims, and there are now 6 million in total there, asked a sample of French Muslims what Muslims in France think. They make up 10% of the population. The results, well, they're very confronting. 49% wanted French Catholics to convert to Islam. It's a country with majority Catholicism. 45% of these Muslims surveyed wanted the total destruction of Israel. And 42% said they wanted Sharia law put above French law. And there's a twist here. You know, you hear people spin this fantasy that don't worry, you know, with time, each new generation will assimilate more, will become, in this case, more French. Well, 42%, like I said, of all those Muslims surveyed here said Sharia law is above French law. But when you ask Muslims under 25 years old, the younger generation, that was actually much higher again. More than half said they wanted Sharia law put above French law. The younger were more radical. And worse, 19% in this poll said they supported the Hamas terrorist group that runs Gaza. Now you think about that, 19%. You might say, oh, at least 81% don't. 19%. That works out to nearly 1 million French Muslims who support an Islamist terrorist group that beheads people, rapes women, kidnaps even children, slaughters the innocent, and starts a war, of course, of total destruction. So you think then, wow, if that's Muslims in France, what must Palestinians themselves in Gaza and the West Bank think? The people Israel must confront. Well, we have a poll now telling us that as well. It was published just this month, taken by the Palestinian Centre for Policy and Surveyed Research. It's quite respected. Despite the consequences of that October 7 attack, the hell of war that's come since, the destruction of key parts of Gaza, 71% of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank, 71% of those polled said they still supported the October 7 slaughter of the Jews. More disturbingly, the pollsters then asked, well, wait a minute, have you actually seen the tape that Israel put out of what Hamas did that day? Things too horrible for me to show you here. I'm sure you've heard about it. This is video of footage that Hamas terrorists themselves filmed as they murdered civilians, mutilated them, dragged a clearly raped woman still bleeding from a pickup, that beheading even a Thai worker with a hoe. I mean, just dreadful and stuff I won't even describe. These are videos that the Israelis released to the world in the confidence that just to see them would appeal to people's basic humanity and shock them into realizing what happened on October 7. This is beyond the pale. This can be explained by nothing that came before. This cannot be justified. This is an appeal to the human in us all. Apparently. You know, and that people would say, oh, God, merciful heaven, this is just too much. This is inexcusable. Yet to the Palestinians who watched that cruelty on this video and were asked by these pollsters, 81% said, there's no atrocity here. I see no atrocity. After seeing all that. And Ghazi Hamad from the Hamas Political Bureau pledged that Hamas would actually keep doing such things to Israel.
Hamad saying the Hamas terror attack on October 7th was just the first, and that there will be a second, third, and fourth attack on Israel.
Here's another thing from that poll of Palestinians, also very frightening. 56% of the Palestinians asked, even the ones in shattered Gaza, right, living among the consequences, thought that Hamas would still win this war. Still thought they'd win. It's almost like that Black Knight scene in Monty Python. This is just a flesh wound as an arm falls off. Now I hear, this is important because I hear Western leaders demanding that Israel stop fighting. Stop fighting. Immediate ceasefire, the UN's just said. Immediate Security Council, immediate ceasefire. And even America abstained, dropping Israel in the muck. Stop fighting. Make a deal with Hamas as if this is going to end this. Make a deal when we know now that even Palestinians think Hamas is winning. They're actually winning. Palestinians say, we're winning. And a deal, a peace now, would actually confirm it. Now here, these Western critics say that for Israel to keep fighting, it just creates more terrorists, just inspires more Muslims to join Hamas. Which is funny, because I don't recall anyone in the West making that argument when the Allies were fighting the Nazis. Oh, please, let's make peace with Mr. Hitler. Don't keep going to Berlin. Please make peace with Mr. Hitler because you'll just create more Nazis. And he'll honour the deal that you sign, honestly. Really? It doesn't work that way. History tells us it doesn't work that way. Hamas will recruit more terrorists if it wins than it will if it loses. And if it wins, you just think how that the ripple effects of that. How many moderate Muslim leaders, the ones who've made peace with Israel, they say, look, drop this war. We don't need this extremism. Let's put the past behind and go together in the future. They will be discredited in the Arab street. They will be undermined. The Islamists will have had a victory. And they'll say, it's like Osama bin Laden said, the leader of Al-Qaeda. He said, the famous quote, when people see a strong horse and a weak horse, they support the strong horse. And look now at Moscow. It is true that war is terrible and comes at a terrible price. But peace also has a price. Peace, in air quotes, has a price. And for Israel, that kind of peace that people want to impose on it now, that has a terrible price. We've heard the warnings. More and more October 7 attacks. And who knows, in the end, Israel's total destruction. Now that's the enemy it faces, and even Russia has now seen it too.